Well, Happy New Year, everyone, and thanks for coming out. I agree with, as Rob mentioned, I'm happy to be in person again. I'm down here from the DC area, and it's great to see faces and be with people again. I'm so glad that people are starting to travel. Today, this topic that I'm going to present today is actually new for the 2023. And so as I walk through this is a topic that I've been pondering and thinking about for many years. But I haven't ever really presented it in a broad form. So I think it'll be interesting that you will, hopefully you'll find it as interesting as I think it is, and we'll go from there. So with that, today we're going to talk a little bit about intro of who is Absolute and kind of what our perspective is, because I think that'll help you understand like the kind of the insights and the stuff that I'll be showing today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about making the most of your cybersecurity investments, although while it's specific to cybersecurity, I think this actually applies to other applications as well, and I'll kind of share that as we go through. As far as the session goes, I would say if you've got a burning question, just raise your hand. I'm not. I'll maybe ask a few audience questions throughout the thing, but not afraid to stop and pause and answer something, and then I'll be available afterwards as well. So let's talk just quickly with Absolute. So it's not the liquor company. Let's get that out of the way to begin with. It is a company, though, that has been around for almost 30 years. And prior to joining Absolute, I actually hadn't heard of them. And while I feel like it's one of the industry's best kept secrets, which I don't know in cyber is a good thing or a bad thing, where it comes from security through obscurity. I don't know if that's a great thing, but certainly it is a company that's been around for a long time. We're both on the NASDAQ and a Canadian stock exchange. And one of the key pieces that many people don't know is the technology has been embedded in probably, I think it's 600 million different devices. And we've worked extensively with almost, I think it's 28 OEMs. I guess I could look at the numbers here. 28 PC OEMs, so Lenovo, Dell, HP. If you think about all of the devices that you all are using every day, and not only devices you're using, but all the fleets of whatever organizations you're from, this software is already embedded in it, and it's in the firmware, which is a very unique position. So when we talk about security, we're talking about operating systems and applications and these different layers of things. There's no better place to start than if you're in the BIOS or the UEFI. And that's one thing that's very unique about Absolute that not many other companies, I don't think any other company can really claim. So with that, we have great insight into the different, how everything runs. So being at that firmware level, it allows us to see, obviously, applications up into the operating system. But from there, we have a ton of data points that we can gather. And that includes things from on the network side to application side. And we'll talk about some of the insights that shares or exposes to us in the presentation here. So at the core of what we do, two things. And if you remember anything out of this presentation, these are kind of some core principles that would be important to remember. One, persistence, and two, resilience. I already hear now like resilience is starting to be used as a buzzword in the cyberspace, which I'm not a huge fan of because I think we do things very differently. And when I think about persistence, again, I'm thinking of it at a firmware level and then building up from that. And truly that to me is what persistence means. And it's an unbreakable tether that regardless if you swap the hard drive, you format the OS, if you do whatever, whether it's malicious or intentional, persistence to me is that unbreakable connection, and resilience is the ability to heal, to bring back those applications regardless of what happened. Let's say that you've installed another application and now they're DLLs that conflict or something of that nature. And you'll see how this impacts the different tools and the mechanisms. And again, so from Absolute, those are two core capabilities that we provide and that are baked into the application. When you think about things like zero trust, another big industry buzzword, and it pains me to see many different vendors that are adopting this, like retro adopting like old technology, and they're saying, oh, it's zero trust. And it's like, well, I'm not really sure like what definition they're using of zero trust. I see like some big name organizations that are almost, I feel like some of them are making up their own definitions of it. To us, zero trust starts in securing the endpoint. So starting with the securing the endpoint and then securing the access. And those are kind of two core principles to me when I think about a zero trust architecture. Being able to have something baked in the firmware, making sure that your endpoint devices are secure, and then securing the access into whatever applications that you're moving into. And of course, things like being able to monitor and have visibility all along that path is incredibly important, because you can't protect what you can't control or you can't see. And so those are certainly core principles. So a little bit about myself. I had this long thing background. I'm glad she didn't read it. But at the core of this, I'm a techie. And I've always been passionate about cybersecurity. I started doing virus disassembly back in the early days, 1990, I think it shows on here. And I pulled out samples. And it's been fascinating to me over my course of my career to see the cyber thing evolve. And I remember being able to look at code samples and actually look at them and understand, like, hey, this is cool code. I understand what this does. I can track it, to like modern things. And actually the 2000 thing was that I love you virus. And I remember when that spread and took down all sorts of organizations, and it was this big, massive thing. And it was just like a word macro. Like, it wasn't even sophisticated, but it brought all sorts of organizations to their knees. And then now when I look at things that I pulled from either obfuscated PowerShell or some of the just even simple base 64 stuff, it is so incredibly complex now. And what the attackers have kind of migrated to, it really is to evade detections and have proven to be fairly effective. Over the course of the last 20 years, the last 20 years, I worked in a combination between Lockheed and Mandiant, and through that, I did everything from incident response to some of the breaches that I'm sure everyone here was either impacted by or read about in the papers, but also led a lot of our security program assessments, so assessed a lot of large organizations and their entire security programs. And that's given me a lot of insight into also why this conversation tonight, I think, is very relevant. Okay, so talking about the endpoint risk and where things are now. Certainly, I've come to believe that the endpoints are often one of the biggest attack surfaces of organizations. And very often, for years, we've been so focused on, and I wouldn't discount securing servers and applications and things on that end. Without a doubt, those are still just as critically important. But one of the things that I look at is, let's say you take an organization that has a fairly high number of not end users, but of employees. Let's say you have a strategic or let's say we're an enterprise class account that may be like 10,000 or more. They have probably 10,000 or more devices, and many of those folks may have multiple devices. So you could easily have 20,000 endpoint devices. And let's say your core server infrastructure may be in the hundreds, but you're not talking in the thousands. And so one of the things that I've kind of shifted my focus, because there has been so much focus on securing that, securing not the perimeter, but the server type assets, is that when you see some of these attacks happen, and obviously that core can be impacted, but restoring and working with the endpoints to get the users back to productivity has been a real challenge. And I've experienced that on the Mandiant side, helping organizations recover from ransomware, things like that. Like, people aren't thinking about, everybody thinks about the servers, they think about that back-end infrastructure that's got to be up and running. But meanwhile, like, you've got all this massive other user stuff that people are like, well, how am I going to restore those, or how am I going to maintain connectivity to those if I have a breach or if I have an attack? So I think one of the things that I would leave you with tonight is that to think through those endpoints and whatever the size of the organization, let's say it's a few thousand devices, how could I reach out and touch all those things if I had to? What if they're not on my VPN? What if I'm not connected to them? How could I maintain that persistence to them, which is an interesting piece. And I do think that industries are going to see continued increases. I don't see this going away anytime soon. There's just not enough prosecution of attackers, and with some of the global, just trying to track some of this stuff down is just incredibly difficult. And I could count probably on if I took my shoes off, hands and toes of the number of cases that I've seen, like successful prosecutions of attack groups. And as soon as you get a few folks that are convicted, there's a long line of people waiting right behind them to take their shot. And certainly, if you've tracked any of the threat groups, there are several, several in the, I was talking earlier about the $100 million club, where some of these folks are making, really, really serious money off of ransomware. And so I don't think that that's going to go away. When we think about ransomware, and I've seen this recent shift to these wiper type things, that's really fascinating, because now they're not even after like the money. There's just like, I really want to destroy this company or have a big impact. And the multifaceted extortion is really the concept where attackers are stealing data and then saying, hey, if you don't pay this ransom to recover your systems because of whatever reason, that we're going to now expose or release this data. And it kind of puts additional pressure on an organization to help them or to really force them to pay. I don't see that going away. And again, these attacks, they don't discount cloud misconfigurations or supply chain attacks. All those things are still going to keep going. I don't really see any reason that those would change. Visibility challenges, we're going to continue to grow. That remote workforce that we've all done in the last two and a half years is here to stay, and I think it's fascinating to see the kind of the push and pull of organizations saying thou must come back into the office, and then employees saying, hey, I'm a cyber person or I'm a technologist, like I can work from anywhere, type thing, and that balance. And so I don't think that that's going away anytime soon. I think that'll continue to be, and what that means for us is now you have to not only secure that traditional perimeter, but now all these folks that are working from Starbucks or any other location where they choose to work. And that makes it very difficult. And I talked a little bit about earlier with organizations not only controlling those end devices, but also recovering them. I think that's a piece that's often overlooked. Cyber resilience adoption will increase. This is something, again, as I mentioned, I hear this now with a lot of organizations. I think this means different things to different people, but essentially it's your ability to maintain business continuity, and that's all the way, not just the applications are available, but making sure that those employees can connect into infrastructure and connect and still do the job that they're supposed to be doing. One of the things that you see in a ransomware or even an attack response is an organization may shut off all external access. So basically you kind of like circle the fort and you control things, and then you start to slowly open up different applications or different things as things are deemed appropriate to come back in. In the case with cyber resiliency, that's something that, again, many organizations are so focused on just getting my server assets back up. They're not really thinking through, like, how do I bring back in my sales folks? How do I bring back in order processing? How do I bring in whatever those different, in a variety of organizations, all of those functions that are happening outside of that corporate perimeter, post-breach, they're slow to come back in, and many organizations don't really think through that. And certainly one of the worst times to think through that is when you're in the middle of a breach or in your middle of a response. So that's something that I would definitely, really share with this audience and make sure folks are maybe thinking in the back of their head, how would I recover if I had to restore, or if I had to do something to all these endpoints? How do I bring them back in? And what's the priority of those? Because I can tell you, you can't restore it all at once. And even if you have a great backup system, a great restoration system, you typically still have to deem things out in a sequential order. This last one I thought was very interesting. It's something that we see around user experience and employee satisfaction and attrition. And as folks are working from home, and especially in the technology field, like frustration is a big thing. And if you're working in an environment and things are slow and the connectivity stinks, like you're not going to last but so long. And so that's one thing that we've seen on the endpoint side, is that the user experience really is important. And we've seen that also with some of our customers, that on the zero trust side with the applications, where we have insight into that, we call it digital experience monitoring. And we can see that users that have bad connectivity are less inclined to do work. And so again, like if you can maintain like good connectivity for them, whether they're at their hotel or they're at the office or wherever they are, that they're more inclined to be more productive. And that's again another thing. When you talk about resiliency, you're talking about productivity of the employees and everybody that's doing work. Okay, so when I think about this work from anywhere environment, we have this. We all probably have to shift from that traditional corporate environment where I have a corporate enterprise. Everybody VPNs into the thing, and then I can monitor traffic and I can do everything that I need to do. That's if it's not already like completely gone, it's moved out the window. And there was this huge rush when COVID happened. Like everybody did this mass shift to open up things so that people could work everywhere. And now what I'm seeing is that companies are now backing up a little bit and saying, well, did we do that the right way? Like, because when COVID hit, like everybody rushed to allow external access. And now a lot of organizations are now backtracking a little bit and saying, well, we rushed that through, but did we really think it through the right way? And is this how we want to architect that? And it really sets up the stage for a zero trust, in that now, we could shift those, really shift the policy so that one, we want to maintain consistent security policies across this entire spectrum. But it has to go from these end users being at the corporate headquarters maybe, or being at home, or being at, again, at a hotel or at a Starbucks. From there, accessing local applications on their endpoint, or potentially accessing, SaaS applications or different enterprise apps. And through this whole thing, right, you're trying to enable a seamless user experience to this. And obviously, each one of these little red dots, it's kind of a security checkpoint that you can start to look at things and start to evaluate, and apply policies, and that really starts to move you into that zero trust arena. So if you have the ability to control things at that endpoint level, then I don't really care if you're at I can make policy decisions that say, hey, if you're on the corporate VPN, I might allow all this, but if you're on a public Wi-Fi, then I might apply different policies for you. And that's something that, or you may not be able to go to different, you may not be able to access certain applications based on where you're connected. And so that's a little bit different of a thought mindset than traditionally where, you would train users to fire up their laptop, connect into VPN, and then, all is good. But that obviously doesn't work well with things like split tunnels and stuff like that, you lose visibility. And so that's where at the endpoint, it really makes sense to have that visibility. Let me grab some more of this absolute here. All right, so let's talk economics, which in a cybersecurity forum is probably one of the great topics. But why is that relevant to us? First and foremost, cybersecurity is part of the business, right? It's a business enabler. It shouldn't be a detractor from the business. And when the business is facing headwinds, cybersecurity is going to face headwinds. Same thing, right? I saw earlier this week the Salesforce was they were letting go, I think, 10% of their workforce. So some pretty big companies having some big impacts, and that's because of revenue and things like that. So again, there's some pretty significant headwinds that the businesses are facing that is going to impact cybersecurity. The International Monetary Fund, they track a lot of growth and things like that forecast. If you look back in 2021, they had they predicted a 6% growth increase. That sharply declined in 2022 to a little over 3%, and now in 2023 it's under 3%, like 2.8 or 2.7, something like that. So you can see a pretty negative, not exactly the growth forecast that we're looking for. And that's, we're seeing that in business now, right? We're seeing a lot of companies that are contracting and saying their revenue forecasts, they're pulling that in. And there's a number of factors that are driving that. Inflation is higher than we've seen in decades. The cost of living is going up. The financial conditions in most regions aren't great. The Ukraine thing is still, it causes global instability, which isn't good for business. And we've still got this COVID thing that keeps is not going away, right? It still keeps trying. I saw there was a new strain that was coming out of China now, and It was impacting India, and I'm like, oh, great, like how many boosters do we need and all this stuff. But what this shows is there's significant economic headwinds. And so when we're talking cybersecurity and we're talking about, hey, I need this new tool, I need this new thing, right, then I think we're going to have a lot of challenges to that. And so this is what the business is facing, and I think it's important to understand that in context. And so as we think about cybersecurity spending trends, this is an interesting study that was done by Enterprise Strategy Group. They polled in this, the most recent one was 742 IT leaders. And if you look in 2022, you saw that almost 70% said they were going to spend more in cybersecurity. And now compare that to 2023, where just a little over half said that same thing. And so you see a lot of business leaders pulling back, say, well, I don't know if I can spend as much as I have. So you can see that kind of that same contraction happening in cybersecurity. A couple interesting things out of this, though. Still, ransomware a top priority. Strengthening cybersecurity was, was some of the primary business issues that were driving the tech spending. So what I thought was probably equally as interesting was treating cyber ahead of some of these other imperatives, like that digital transformation or shift to cloud or artificial intelligence and machine learning. That cyber was now moving ahead of some of these other technology investments that over the last couple of years were probably the #1 business imperative. So what's really cool out of all of this is cyber's in a really good spot, and cyber's moving to the top of these businesses' lists. So regardless of the economic conditions, right? So we've got really negative, a lot of headwinds for the business. Cybersecurity is still pretty well funded and is still going to be a core thing because they see the negative impacts if you discard or you don't invest in cybersecurity and you end up having a massive event or something like that. And again, if you're unfortunate enough to have a major breach, it can certainly be one of the worst days of any technologist's career, especially if you're in the organization, you're not a consultant that's helping them through it. All right, so let's talk about how we can help in some of the things that our data on the absolute side shows us. And this is a graphic here, and this basically shows what this is a we took some applications, and for 2 weeks we monitored the health of these applications. And so we anonymized the tools because we didn't want to call anyone out here, but we were able to group them with end user management, endpoint protection, an EDR tool, and a VPN piece, or VPN software. And so if you think about these applications living across endpoints, and we watched them for 2 weeks, and what we did a first survey and we said, well, how what do you think your applications are running? And everybody says, oh, I'm 90-some% compliant. And we went into the organization, we saw like these were actually their compliance rates over here. We took our software, we flipped it on, and which has that self-healing capability, and we watched it play out over a couple weeks. Let's see if we can get this to play. There we go. You can kind of see the shift in these applications as they kind of move across the 2 weeks.
What standard are you using to show that they are resilient? Is it like NIST or ISO?
It's the so we use this term called application health. And what that means to us is, are the services, there's a number of factors that we look at. Are the services installed? Are they running? Are the registry keys still available? Is it the right version?
Internal.
It is.
Okay.
It is. But it's very interesting to see that with some basic like visibility into the applications, you can see how bad things are. Because when you poll an organization, you say, well, what's the install rate of your VPN? People say, well, it's 99%. But then when you look to see, like, are those all working properly, or are they all installed properly, that type of thing, then you see this massive like degradation. And then if you watch it over time, it starts to plummet. And that's something that having, when we talk about resiliency, that's something that having software self-heal, which means, hey, we're watching that software. If it goes down, we're going to reinstall it. A great example of that is not long after I joined Absolute, we use our own Zero Trust product, and I was having trouble with the connectivity. in my home network. And so the first thing I did as a techie, right, I'm like, I uninstall their software, and like any normal technologist would do. And so I uninstall it, and I get my connectivity, and all of a sudden it breaks again. I'm like, what is up with this? And so I go back and I look, and that software like came back. And the VPN, the corporate VPN stuff like was back on my machine. I'm like, I didn't install this. I just got rid of this stuff. So I'm like, do I have a virus here? Like, what's going on? So I'm looking, and what it turned out was it was the self-healing nature of Absolute. That was, it saw that I had uninstalled the corporate VPN, the approved VPN software, and was actually reinstalling that, silently in the background every time that I would uninstall it. So it's pretty cool software. When you think about from a support perspective and making sure that all of these investments that we've made in cyber stuff are actually up and running from that perspective.
So it's agent-based?
It is.
But it's at the firmware level.
Firmware, yeah. So
To monitor if you want to uninstall.
that's exactly right. Yep. So if I even like went to the level of re-image the device, it would still come back.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So could you talk about that a little bit? Is it preloaded in certain models and then you activate it?
It is. So exactly. So it's again 28 OEMs. So probably every vendor that is producing laptops now, it's baked into the firmware. And then from there, if you activate it, then it can do anything to the OS level as well. And it is an agent that gets installed at the OS level. And then from there, one of the coolest things that they've done is not only monitor the Absolute software, but monitor, what is it, Chandler, 65, what's the number? Over 70 different applications. So if you think about Rapid7 or CrowdStrike or any other large name vendor, we're monitoring those as well. And so while on that last slide, while I didn't want to showcase like specifically these, if you think about McAfee or any other name any big security tool, we're likely monitoring those as well. And, go ahead.
SolarWinds, did they call you afterwards?
Not at Absolute, but
You're saying that over time, the various different applications, their health degrades. What gives? Why do you say that? What's it doing?
yeah. So it's a number of things. It can be users like uninstalling stuff, like I gave you that example earlier. It can also be a patch fails, or a patch on another product causes some failure in the other application. There's just a number of things that happen that break applications over time. And that's one of the pieces that Absolute is looking for. Again, there's a number of factors that we look for. And if we see a service that stops or a service that fails, we'll naturally restart that.
Does it auto-update the firmware?
It does not. I don't think it auto updates the firmware. No. No, because our piece is already in there, and it's been baked in for so many years. Like, we don't even care if the firmware is up to date. Sure.
Out of curiosity, what kind of security measures do you make sure so that your firmware
That our stuff isn't? Yeah. I don't know. Chandler, what do you think? Brian?
Well, we run through a lot of pen testing and all that, right? There's a lot of testing that takes place at the BIOS level and has to get approved by the OEMs and by each of the board manufacturers to make sure that software is secured.
Yeah, I know that when I first came on board, I was a little bit horrified when I found out like what this stuff actually does, especially coming from Mandiant and working a lot of breach response. But they have one, so they've been around for 30 years. So you may have heard of them as CompuTrace is one of the fundamental, I guess, one of the brands that they used to use. And it's been around for a long time, and so it's been pretty heavily tested and beat on and pen test, and I've seen a couple of articles where folks have deconstructed everything that Absolute does, and I've yet to see. Somebody one of our clients sent me a YouTube video of somebody trying to bypass this, and the process was pretty impressive, but when you think about the real risk of someone actually doing this, it was like, okay, like likelihood, not likely. impact, single device, type thing. Like this, on my list of risk, this is pretty low on that scale. There's probably a lot of other things that are going to happen. And I'll just, instead of making you go look up this YouTube video, but this person like literally disassembled the entire laptop and they desoldered some EEPROM chips on the motherboard and then like reflashed the BIOS and then put it all back together, and it happened to work, and then still like had to reflash it and then got his laptop back running and said, look, like we bypassed this lock screen. And the drive was still encrypted, so it was all for naught. But it was like, he was like, hey, we bypassed absolute, I'm like, okay, for what, to what end, that type of thing. But
So you do have drive encryption. Very important.
yes, exactly. And that's, so drive encryption can be one of the things that we certainly monitor and can repair. All right, so assuming now that your applications are deployed and they're up and running and they're resilient, there's something called this capability gap. And this is one of those things that I've seen over the last probably 10 years that really bothers me. And what I see here is that this capability gap, which is really the definition, is the difference between the actual product functions and the feature adoption by users, right? So this product can do all of these things. And so, who here uses, Microsoft Office, right? Like probably everybody, right? Office has 12, I saw some stat and said 12,000 features. 12,000, I use like 6, type thing, right? Like I don't need a whole lot. 12,000 features. And think about all of the security tools and the different things that we use and all those features that are baked into that. And what this data, so Absolute, we track, what our users use, and that helps us make sure that we're, developing products that are aligned to what our customers need and want. But we took a feature usage, and I compared that between small organizations with like less than 100. So this is in North America, customers with less than 100 licenses versus an enterprise. So folks that are higher number. And what this shows is that for just one core feature, right, and a piece of the product, 65% of them didn't even use it. And then on the enterprise side, right, they had a lot more, there was still 32%, but 52% were like, hi, they got this new feature and they were taking advantage of it. And so that's one thing that I would really challenge this group and the folks here, like, of the products that we have, like, are we using all of those features? And one of the things that makes this incredibly difficult is like that feature creep of applications, where now I've got 2 tools that can do the same thing. And how many times, like, that just makes our security jobs that much more difficult when you don't even know what application is trying to protect or defend these certain things, right? Because you've got 3 different tools that can do the same thing. So, one of the key parts or points to, leveraging the applications that you already have is making sure that you do understand all of those things that it can do and are taking advantage of that. Right? So this is a way that you don't have to go back and get more budget or expand more things. It's like, it's use what you have, like implement the things that you have. A lot of times I've seen in the security industry where folks are very complacent with the status quo. Like, I already have a tool that does that, type thing. And they don't really realize that tool has evolved and now it does that and these other things. And I could now consolidate. And from my kind of fundamental concept in security has always been keep it simple. And as defenders, like the more streamlined, the more simple that we can, manage things, the better off that we're going to be when it comes to, making sure that we didn't miss something or there's a gap or there's something that we overlooked.
So this report should give to the customer to show them what they can do, or a screen or something? How do you get the information?
Yeah, so we definitely have dashboards that will show them, not on this feature stuff, but certainly that we have dashboards of like the applications,
Okay.
that
Case and the
exactly. Yep.
path they can take to enhance.
Yep, exactly.
We do recurrent reviews with our customers of their holistic utilization of the console, what they're using. There's health scores tied to that and recommendations on how they should be using it more.
Yeah, in fact, one of the biggest things that from the professional services side that we do is work with customers and sit down and say, hey, you're not using this persistent stuff. Like you've already bought the product and they're doing it for like asset management or something like that because it provides great visibility into all their fleet, like all their devices. And if they're not using persistent, let's say that they're, regardless, SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, whatever it is, right? Like, why would you not turn that on? So if an attacker or someone rips through the environment and disables all these things, that stuff all comes back. Like that's glorious, and this is an example of this. So this is a bigger customer, right? Almost 600,000 endpoints. We watched 2 weeks on this case, and so 24,000 of those endpoints we deemed unhealthy, and that means they had something that was not running, right? And so that could be a service that had failed or something out of compliance with the rules, the policies that we had set up. So basically, those would be risk to the organization. This number, it sounds large. It's less than 4%. So I would challenge most organizations, if you came in and said, hey, we're 96% compliant, like that's pretty good. But if we take this through, so as we watched our software running in this environment, we had 60,000. So almost each one of those like required a couple repairs or reinstalls. Basically, you have competing issues between applications. And of those 60,000 remediations, you can figure any number that you want here. I don't know if it's I just picked $100. So if it cost me $100 for an end user that, hey, my VPN application is not working, so I got to call in the help desk. Whatever cost you associate with that, it's something. There's some cost there. And when you multiply that out times the number of remediations, it's significant. And in this case, obviously, this is a big example, but it's big dollars. And so think about all of those applications that break, whatever it is. If you've got to, let's say you're a security professional and you see, hey, my endpoint EDR tool is not running here. Like, how do I go fix that? Well, they're not on the VPN. And so using stuff like Absolute with that persistent tether, we can push out scripts to it. We can do all sorts of other things to make sure that or it natively repairs itself like on the endpoint. And that's where I think this software is very powerful, especially in the security community. And historically, it's been aligned towards more of the IT side of house. And I think there's just great applicability in the security space for all of those tools that help us protect an organization. So with that, a couple key takeaways. I would highly encourage everyone to review those existing investments that you have, right? So we talked about the business economics, the headwinds that we're all facing. There is software. I think one of the biggest points to really this presentation is to let everyone know, like, there is self-healing software out there. There is firmware-based stuff that will persist your other applications that we all rely on to secure businesses. And again, like taking advantage of really that self-healing nature, maximizing the product usage, right? So the things that you've already bought, taking advantage of, using it, having something like Absolute that's already baked into all of the devices, your whole fleet of devices that you already have, is something that's already, certainly already there. I obviously in professional services, I'm a huge advocate for bringing in external help when you need it. And one of the things that's always struck me as interesting is because people always say like professional services is expensive. And some of these things they're tasks that an organization could do, but yet they never get to it. It's almost like an incident response plan or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, we got to write one of those, but they've never sat down and actually did it. Or, oh yeah, we got to install that piece. Yeah, we're going to turn on that new feature, but yeah, we'll get to it next month. Oh, this other project came in and it got pushed. And so that's where stuff like professional services can really help you, like, because we come in and we do it and then we leave, that type of thing. And so I would definitely maybe retrain your idea on that in that if you need something to get done, professional services is typically a good way to do that. And then we've got some other stats around endpoint agents and consolidating those things, which certainly I think that'll be one of the next consolidation trends that we see across the industry. Is our endpoints now have so many agents that are running on them that we have to figure out like what's a good solution to pare that down so we can again simplify security as much as we can. So with that, I'll open it up to questions, and if they're folks that are.
Do you work, I'm thinking about some antiquated equipment, for industrial control systems, for example. Do you work with firmware vendors and that thing? Not the traditional laptops, but more like.
Yeah, some of the ICS stuff, I haven't seen them play in that space because, those are typical like, the PLC type things and that hardware is so specific. It is an interesting case though. I may take that back to our CTO and see if we've dabbled. I haven't seen it in just I've only been with Absolute now 9 or 10 months, but it's an interesting idea. Sure.
Going on that, IoT is expanding quite a lot. Have you guys thought of, making it so that, smaller providers could maybe use some of your
Incorporate it? Yeah, it would depend on, our relationship now is with those OEMs. And so if the OEMs are producing that stuff, then yes, the possibility is certainly there. But what I've seen on the OEM side, it takes them a long time to get the firmware out to, their development cycle and testing cycle is huge. And that's one of the things actually coming to Absolute that I really appreciated is this software is rock solid. And I think it's one of the, you were asking about like the security testing of it. Like if this had issues, like you've got major OEMs that
It sounds like you guys would need a very big platform, like maybe like something like the Raspberry Pi or something
right.
like that size.
Exactly. Yeah. To make it make sense. That's right. Sure.
So are you, when I'm comparing your software based on what I've just heard, would your chief competitors be other MDM type solutions like an AirWatch Workspace ONE that you're trying to basically compete against them?
Yeah,
you're trying to basically replace them as kind of being more foundational because they've got more access at the firmware level. You got more access to
right.
services like you could enforce not only encryption of hard disk but complex
right.
passwords, all these other applications.
I have struggled to find a direct competitor. Yeah, it's really, it's also challenging for our customers too, because they're like, well, where does this fit in my stack? And it's like, it's almost like, who's the company that are like, we don't make the whatever, we just make it better? Like, I feel like that's a, BASF, right? It's a little bit like this, like Absolute, like not only, certainly there's an asset management component to it, but it's like, if you have whatever those security tools, those other investments, even the AirWatch as an example, we could persist their agent on top of everything else. And so that's where, and one, like maybe this is an industry dirty secret, but some of these big vendors, like when you look at a deployment of whatever application, there's a lot of failed endpoint protections, let's say. So if you look at, let's take, I don't want to name any vendor. Let's take a specific console and you're looking and you see, okay, across 10,000 endpoints, I have 8,000 that are reporting in, right? Well, what are those other 2,000? Like, what's wrong with those other 2,000?
Especially on older operating systems.
Right, like, and how do you track that? How do you how do you fix that? So you got 2,000 endpoints that let's say, so I have 8,000 reporting in my console, I can monitor, those all look great, but I've got a significant amount that aren't even reporting in. And I don't know if it's because they're not on my VPN or they're not connected. Like, how do I? That's a challenge. And so using something like Absolute that has that persistence capability, whether they're on your network or not, to be able to restore or bring that back up. And that's one of the things when I see some of the compliance percentages, people say, well, those devices are off network or they're not, so I'm not as concerned about them. Good topic. Hang on. Well, let's go over.
Sorry, go ahead.
Good. We'll shift over here.
I mean, just to follow up on competitors, I can think of Palo Alto with a Prisma access. I mean, that's at a different level. I can think also of NAC vendors, because that's what they do, posture analysis, checking.
Yeah, potentially.
They will not self-remediate, however. I mean,
Right,
that would be
right.
a big difference.
Yeah, and some of that compliance checking that they're doing, that's certainly stuff, but they're not repairing. And that's something that's I think unique to Absolute, and it's not in the firmware, and so you wipe one of those things and okay, you're done, and much less have an attacker that goes through and has a script to uninstall some of these things. That's where that's where that self-healing comes in. Hang on, let's go over here to the far left.
Simple question. So for those of us that buy from like CDW or SHI,
you're with all the OEMs, and we buy, Lenovo machines, say for example, like, are you reselling, are they reselling?
Yes.
Through CDW?
Yes.
Just like an
And
option to add, or?
yes, it's typically an option to add, and sometimes it's rebranded.
Okay.
What is it? Let me ask Chandler, because so some of the times like it's underneath the covers, and
Yeah, so you have the flexibility, it can be activated at manufacturing, and then that can go downstream through the supply chain or route to market from that perspective. You can buy it directly from CDW if you want to. You don't have to buy it from Lenovo, HP, or Dell. The other cool thing that I'll call out is if a lot of us, given the supply chain challenges that have existed over the last 3 years, if you have a mixed hardware environment, we are hardware agnostic. I think that's really important to call out, is you can buy, you can cover your fleet from a purchase with CDW, or you can even cover your HP fleet if it's mixed with Lenovo with a purchase through Lenovo. So we have a lot of flexibility relative to route to market just because of the agnostic nature of our technology.
Awesome. It's the how to buy question. I mean, I know you want someone to ask that, right?
sure.
I want you to ask that.
I'm just a techie. I love this stuff. Yeah. All right, let's go here on the left, and then we'll come back to you.
So where does, when you've got this persistence involved, where does it restore from? Is it from a cloud? Is it from local servers? You can choose where.
It's configurable. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then how does it get updates to the?
Yeah, that's a good question.
To it?
Updates to our agent.
Yeah.
So it checks in. Basically, it's anytime it has connectivity, it's going to try to check in, and that's also configurable. Whether you want to check in every couple minutes or 15 minutes. I think by default it's like 15 minutes. And it also it's kind of smart on how it does its check-in. Like it'll look for different things at different times. It's kind of monitoring what's happening on the PC or on the endpoint device, and then it's checking in to maybe look for new policies or things that get pushed down. There's a lot of on the back end, we can group devices because you may have certain devices that follow different policies and things like that.
Does it do things like remote shell or remote console or patching?
Not remote shell.
It'll run PowerShell scripts.
Yeah, I mean, I know we can push PowerShell down to devices, maybe to kick off, but again, it's not patching per se, so it's not.
Not like a live remote control or a
Right.
live
No.
console. It doesn't do that. Okay.
No. Hang on, go ahead.
Just curious, is this Windows only, or do you guys support Linux, or anything below that, or?
I'll defer to Brian here. I know.
So we do have Linux and we have a Mac agent, right? Not iOS, but full Mac operating system. The only
Yeah.
difference is that with Mac, we're not embedded in a non-flashable portion of the BIOS because Apple doesn't let anybody
Right.
in there.
Apple, we're not in. Like Chromebooks, we have an agent. So when you want to manage an entire fleet, we have that capability. But things like a Chromebook, there's nothing to embed in the firmware. You lose the firmware persistence.
So for some devices that maybe not in the firmware, you can get an agent that.
Still the agent, still all the control, still the persistence. But if they slick the drive, there's nothing that anyone can do. Sure.
I'm really curious what's executing in the firmware to give the persistence. Is this something that's modifying kernel data structures? Is it placing files in certain places? Is Windows just aware to make a call into the firmware?
It's a low-level trusted Windows process that happens in the boot.
So this is something that Microsoft has included in there. They know, go check
Yeah.
the absolute stuff.
So I'll defer, Brian, if you have additional info. But it's as it's booting, right? So in the BIOS level, the agent pops up and it says, "Hey, I'm going to go look for the following things. I want to register as a trusted process." As Windows boots, it goes out and it looks and it says, "Oh, hey, this thing just ran. I need to call back to it." And then from there, it starts its process at the very core of Windows, as an example.
So if I was a piece of malware and I wanted to remove that part of Windows, that would remove the persistence as well.
Because it's in a non-flashable portion of the BIOS. If somebody does modify that, it'll run what they call an RPCNetP out of the cloud into our SaaS-based center, and it'll reinstall and fix that agent.
So the firmware itself has a network connection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as soon as it sees an operating system, so one, it's got to have an operating system. As soon as it sees a new operating system, especially if somebody wipes it, then that's what runs the RPCNetP executable out over the internet down to the SaaS-based center, and it reinstalls the service. It's not a traditional agent. You can't go and uninstall our software like traditional software.
Sure. Yeah, but I was trying to figure out how it pulled itself it's got to embed itself into Windows. So either Windows need to be aware of, hey, you're there, here's the
Right.
configuration, pull it in, or it's making a network connection and then it's modifying data structures or placing itself in the file system in some way.
Right down, like basically what you're talking about, like down to the kernel level, right? Like essentially, that's where it's sitting.
But if those hooks were removed from the kernel, it wouldn't
Well-
be able to talk to the kernel and it wouldn't be able to install the agent
But-
in the OS.
If it's a non-flashable portion of the BIOS, if something does something, it will call out and repair itself, right? It's set to repair itself into the operating system.
So if it-
You would have to have malware that would be constantly looking to uninstall those hooks and undo what Absolute does. Right? So let's say you had some malware that could figure out how to uninstall all of the Absolute pieces. Then on the next reboot, it would all come back.
But so it doesn't work with Linux. So if I put Linux on there, it's not going to work.
That's true.
So that means
Yes.
I could conceivably modify Windows to also not look there.
You can, but to be honest with you, we've had so many people try to do it and they haven't.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet.
We went
Doesn't mean
black-
it's not possible.
We've had black hat people try to do it and they couldn't destroy it, so.
Good.
Good question.
Virtual systems, the Amazon EC2 instance or virtual desktop, things like that. So Amazon typically, unless you have a specific configuration, specific arrangement, you don't have access to the firmware. Do you guys work with the AWS EC2 instance, for example?
No, it does not. Well, I have to be careful because it will actually run in non-support. I would say probably the right answer is it's not supported to.
Not supported. It'll run in a virtual
Yeah.
environment, but because you can't access the firmware in that, but it
Right.
will run as like.
But the agent does run in those environments. It's just not supported, and it actually runs on servers, but it's not supported. But that's also kind of cool. Like you could have server applications that could self-heal, or if a service fails, it automatically like restarts itself, or things like that. I think in that area, I don't know if the corporate decision was like that. That could be messy, but use it at your own risk if you use it in non-supported functions. Good questions though. All right, anything else? Awesome. Well, thank you all for your time again. Happy New Year. I'll be around for a little while later. And anything else? Thank you very much.